Hello, we are live. Welcome back to Sistersong, the Bone Harp Part 2.
Woo!
Woo! um, so that's what's happening. I don't know if we should do a little high introduction for people who weren't here last time.
I think we should.
I think we should. So we'll do a quick, who we are and what we're doing, and give everyone a chance to filter in as, because life and people and time and all these things.
Yeah.
But yes, welcome to a midwinter stream. We've got all festive. I hope people can hear music. Because I can't tell. It's one of those things when you're like running the stream, you don't know if the music is working. So I hope the music is working. So yes, Lucy, would you like to introduce yourself and say who you are and what you're doing here?
What are any of us doing here?
Big question.
Hello, yeah, I'm Lucy Hounsome. For this book, I'm Lucy Holland, just to be a little bit more confusing. I am the author of Sistersong, that really big face you can see in the middle of your screen.
I want to point the right direction. That way? Is that the right direction?
And I'm pointing that way.
We've got to do it like the opposite of what we're actually...
Oh, there we go.
Yay! Yeah, that thing.
Hi, yeah. Sistersong is out in April the 15th, 2021 to be precise. And it is a kind of modern-ish, when I say modern, I don't actually mean modern at all. I mean modern by tone rather than setting, reimagining of the Two Sisters murder ballad. And we did talk a little bit about the Two Sisters on our last live stream, which it covered all manner of terrible things. Like, I think we talked about murdering children once. I have a horrible memory of saying I murdered a child.
We definitely did talk about murdering children, and someone came back in at that exact point. And for people joining now, this is a wholesome stream, not for kids.
Yeah, she was 15. She was 15. It's not like, she was 2 or anything. I feel like we should justify this statement. It wasn't really murder.
Look, you should not ever say the phrase, I feel like we should justify the statement being child murder. That's not we're sorry. Apologies, everyone. No child murder here. We're not supporting that.
Anyway, you have to read the book and then you'll find out that, maybe it was murder, but maybe it wasn't. It was all a big misunderstanding. But yeah, that's in the future. What we're here tonight to talk about, well, obviously, I'll be talking a little bit more about the novel and the process of writing the novel and any questions you might have about Sistersong. But really, I feel like Becky is the main character in this stream because she's here because I have to say we, but I don't want to say we because I'm not actually building the harp. But the whole idea behind these live streams is to bring the central motif of the novel to life, grisly life, because it is in fact the bone harp, which is probably the central symbol of the original ballad. And after a few conversations with Becky that happened well over 2 years ago, I think.
Ages ago.
Yeah, we thought, bone harp. That sounds cool. That sounds creepy. Wouldn't it be really awesome if that actually existed? Like, not really, but as close approximation
as we can get. I did have a thought today. I've because I should introduce myself before we go off on a ramble about the harp. I'm Becky Pepperdine. I'm a maker / content creator, and I'm making the bone harp. Yeah, so that's happening. But I had this crazy idea today where I was like, wouldn't it be cool if there were a bit more shadows on it than maybe kind of like bookshop lighting would provide? So what about we build a base that's got like lighting in it, and then maybe there's like some smoke, so it's just kind of sitting there ethereally. We went through this whole process of like simplifying this harp down and down and down so that, it wasn't a complicated build for me. And now I'm just like, but what other things could I do?
And before it's even built, what other things?
Yeah, I haven't built much, if any, of it yet. Yay!
But we have 6 of these live streams in total, so you really do get to see, if you drop in on everyone, you do get to see the whole creative crafting process from beginning to end. So of course, since this is only live stream number 2, We
haven't got very far yet.
Haven't got to the bone harp yet, but that's going to be a big denouement. You know, like in the way that it is in the novel.
Yeah, big payoff. It's going to be worth it. Stick around. But yeah, also these streams are going on to, you know, they're staying on YouTube, so you can watch back if you missed anything. You can catch up and see what's happening. And yeah, we will be taking questions in the chat all evening, while Lucy and I both have drinks. So Lucy's on the gin, I'm on the mulled wine. So we are going to get, you know, consistently more drunk as the evening goes on. So, you know, if you want to ask us things, today's the day.
Tonight's the night. Well, you know, I can't say that I won't also be drinking on the following live stream. But I think I don't want to make that sort of promise. You know?
Yeah, it's just this year we did promise mulled wine and gin in actually our announcement of this week's stream. So.
And that is, and actually, I have to say, I think the mulled wine presents a much greater danger, it being hot.
Ah, it's so hot and tasty. It's like Ribena.
Excellent.
Anyway, so I keep wanting to say last week, but last month, which seems equally like not that long ago, and also about 10 years ago, especially in the 2020, because like we were in a whole different world 4 weeks ago.
The 2020 timeline is
it is for those community fans out there. We are in the darkest timeline now. Like it's happened. So last time, for about a month ago, we looked at the conceptualizing of both the harp and Sistersong as a whole. We talked about the original ballad, and we talked about kind of taking what is really quite a vague description, no criticism meant, to a full design that could actually then exist three-dimensionally. And that was fun. And we ended that episode, stream, thinking that we had the final harp design. And then some things happened.
It's actually rather like writing a novel. You kind of think you've got to the end, and then you haven't, and your editor says you haven't, and you know, it's like I wrote the epilogue, and the first epilogue I wrote was really quite dark. So if anyone's actually read the book, then the version you'll have read has the new shiny epilogue that is actually quite a lot more uplifting and nice than the original epilogue that I wrote. But it was a good thing. I'm not saying that, you know, obviously with the harp design, you know, like you should see it now. It's absolutely fantastic. But this is what comes out of like, you know, trial and error and discussion. And editing. Yeah, stuff happens. Better stuff.
Yeah, you'll notice if you were here last time, you'll notice we've got a colour change to our beautiful backdrop, which is sort of in honour of the beautiful proof copies that Lisa's got that are now out in the wild, which look how pretty. Oh, it's so shiny. So yeah, we've colour changed in honour of the proofs, which are, am I right in thinking there are sort of reviews coming in now? Some people are sort of saying nice things about it.
They're saying some lovely things about it, so thank you very much for those who have said lovely things about it. That's really encouraging. You very often work in isolation writing a book, and you know, while it's obviously an amazing boost when you manage to sell a book to a publisher and they put actual money on the table and they say, I want to buy it, obviously that's great. But really, you know, maybe you don't start believing that it's like an okay book until you get actual readers' feedback. And so that really means a lot to me. I mean, I got my 1-star review. I got my 3-star reviews. I embrace all the reviews, you know, like I'm just happy that the book is out there and it's being read. That's the writer's dream, really, to share the story and make it real, not just for me, but for everyone.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a nice point as well, like where you are now, when you can actually hold a real physical book in your hands, which for so long it exists, well, first digitally and then, you know, probably in notebooks and then digitally, and then there's kind of a printed stack of paper. Now it's a real book. Look at it, book
it
shaped.
Is. And they did such a lovely autumnal festive color scheme for the proof. So I'm pretty I'm just thrilled that it got like this new look on top of its already gorgeous gold and blue look.
Yeah, so we've embraced that for our midwinter stream. It's all fiery, and wanted to briefly touch on this because we did do that. Midwinter is traditionally, especially in stories of old around the time that Sistersong is set, midwinter is a time for tales of murder and ghosts and dark things, and it's a time when you gather around the fire and tell tales and beat away the dark. So it feels particularly appropriate that we are here tonight on the, I think officially it was the longest, or it was the shortest day of the year at 10:26 a.m. today.
That's underwhelming.
I know. I was a bit disappointed too, because that's not anything. But yes, we are here to talk murder.
Not just murder. We're here to talk, about creative processes and the fun stuff that goes with making a murder harp. I mean, a nice bone harp. I mean, a lovely instrument.
None of those things were true. You tried to make it. Stop trying to make it nicer. It's a horrific thing.
That's why we like it. That's why you like it.
Just hello to Nathalie and Ali and Netjaz who are hanging about in chat. We've got a few more viewers who aren't chatting yet, but that's fine. You are welcome to just lurk and sit and listen to us blabber for the next. Originally, last year at the time we did a 2-hour stream. We might not quite make it to a 2-hour stream this time just because the content I've got is not quite long enough.
You say that, but you haven't accounted for my amazing ability to ramble.
Yeah, we're going to run out of video though, so you're just on your own at a certain point. Anyway, so as I was saying, last time we thought we'd found the finished harp. And then stuff happened.
Like Becky's imagination.
I got some ideas. Well, Lucy and I have talked about this a lot and talked about the kind of combination of it needs to be beautiful, but it needs to be a skeleton. And it needs to be recognizably a skeleton after a second. Like, you don't want to look at it and think dead body. You want to look at it and think, oh, beautiful instrument, and then hang on. And I still didn't quite feel that we had that. So let's have a look at what's been going on. Look, whole new screen. I love this. We've got 2 screens this time. I really up the ante. Just think how beautiful our streams will be by April.
I know, you'll be really good by then, like the maestra of live streaming.
Yeah, yes. So this is the bone harp as we left it kind of last time. This is what we had. I do apologise for why it's red. This is CAD, this is computer aided design, and this is me working in mesh mixer. That's hard to say after some old wine. This is me working in mesh mixer.
So Sean Connery.
Mesh mixer. Yeah. So is that playing? Is that doing a thing? We'll find out in a minute. Hopefully. It's moving. It is moving.
Slowly moving.
Ali and Netjaz, I apologise for low res. Something happened with all my cameras and all my captures this time, and they all just went haywire, and like some things were coming in at like 50 frames per second and some things were coming in at like 300 frames per second. It was very confusing and stuff just broke, and I don't know how to fix it yet, and there was a time, and I'm sorry. So yes, but this was the bone harp as we had last time, and it's red because I still haven't got to grips with Mesh Mixer enough to work out how to fix it, so...
Oh, well, hang on, whoa. Don't admit that. I thought it was red because it was like, blood. It's such a dark, deep red.
Yeah, that is definitely what I was trying for. I wanted it to look like blood.
Yeah, well, I kind of thought it was deliberate when you first sent it over. I was like, whoa, that's dark. Oh my God, she's gone further than I thought she would. Yeah, but I liked it. Edgy design.
Edgy. So yeah, this is my nice little mesh model that I bought a skeleton and basically did things with it. So yes, and then I proceeded to do a lot more things with it. So we'll see me taking things apart in just a second. But while we're doing that, because today we're talking about taking things from like idea and concept to a reality. So today is me taking a drawing into a 3D model into a sculpt, and Lucy taking a folk ballad to a real novel.
Indeed.
Lucy, how do you turn a folk ballad into a novel?
Wow.
I know that's quite a big question. What was the first step? So we talked last week about your inspiration and like loving the folk ballad and wanting to write something, you know, getting interested in the historical period. And what happened next? What was your sort of next step of, I've got this, you know, I've got this murder ballad, I've got this rough kind of setting. What happened next?
Well, when I first heard the ballad, I knew I wanted to write. In fact, it was the moment of the bone harp kind of crafting that stuck with me, and I knew I wanted to write that scene. And so the desire to turn it into a novel was completely focused on that pivotal scene, the creation of the bone harp, because the ballad just doesn't have enough information in it, and it also skims a kind of romantically over the gruesome truth of it, which means, you know, if you try and turn a human skeleton into a musical instrument, it's not a pretty process, as I'm sure everyone can unwillingly imagine.
Yeah, we're sure no one knows, but we hope everyone can picture in their head that, yeah, there's some clearly blood and guts involved.
There's blood and guts, and clearly because I'm just dark like this, I just thought, oh, wouldn't that be great? What a great scene to write, like the emotional tension. Imagine that scene with all the power of a novel behind it, with all the power of characters who you have come to know and perhaps love, but at least characters who you've spent a good deal of writing time with. Can you imagine what sort of power that scene would have if you've, you know, spent time with these people? And that's the kind of core of a Sistersong. But of course, to get there, the whole thing had to be set up. You know, I had to have a world, I had to have a setting, I had to have of course, the whole, you know, not just the cast of the 3 children of the king. I had to have, you know, the king himself, the queen, their mother, and then expand out from there. In the original ballad, it's a harper, a travelling harper, who happens by and turns the youngest child into the harp, which I thought was a bit weird, so I don't actually have that part in the story.
Also,
a lot of characters.
Do harpers, I mean, I think we touched on this last week.
Yeah.
Are harpers harp makers? Because I feel like those are 2 very different skill sets.
Well, it's like, are violinists violin makers?
I certainly never was. I played the violin for 7 years, and if you ask me how any of it is constructed, I could tell you there's a post in the middle, but beyond that...
Yeah, well, it's a really good point. And I also thought it was, again, pretty... As we've just touched on, like a kind of implausible. Okay, like don't even get me started on implausibility of turning a human body into a harp. Yeah, because there's also the other thing.
Okay. Even if he knows how to build a harp, how does he know how to build a harp out of the skeleton? Like, was he a butcher in a previous life that he's really good at like skinning and cleaning bones? Like, who is this guy? That's a whole other novel.
Yeah. I kind of, God, you know what? It really is. Yeah. Idea. Oh, the harper who goes around changing young women into musical instruments.
Is he like some sort of avenging angel who traps the souls so they can get their revenge, so they can sing these songs? Like, what is his deal, man?
Oh, he's a bit like a Melmoth the Wanderer character, you know, but darker and more kind of trying to save.
Tell me you're not.
Stop! I don't need more ideas.
We're doing this novel now, Sistersong now, other novels later.
Yeah, but you see just from this conversation how ideas can run away with you and they take on a life of their own. But of course, this is the problem with ideas. Ideas are all very well, but then you have to sit down and you have to turn the idea into something that actually works outside of your head, that may work in other people's heads. That is actually hard.
Yeah, you just said that ideas can get away from you. Was there a point where you actually, at any point where you had to rein it in? Do you get massively carried away with ideas and have to go, no, hang on, one book, these core things?
Okay, I can tell you exactly where I got. I had to rein it in. At one point, so in the very beginning, I imagined Sistersong to be a secondary world fantasy because that is what I was used to writing. That's my default. And
for those that don't know, can we just explain secondary world fantasy?
Secondary world fantasy is simply like it's like Lord of the Rings, like Middle Earth. It's like, you know, Wheel of Time. Like it's
Game of
basically
Thrones.
it's any what you mostly epic fantasy is set in a made up Narnia. You know, like it's a world that is not our world. It's probably very like our world, because obviously humans are humans and are actually quite unimaginative when it comes to repopulating their secondary worlds with the same old stuff that we have in this world. Don't get me started. Anyway, a non-secondary
within
world,
a different world, basically.
A fantasy within a different world is a secondary world, yeah. But I decided that I'd done that, and you know, I just needed to grow as a writer, and I needed to try something else and challenge myself. So I started thinking about giving it a historical setting. And once I'd settled on my local history, so in Devon, I live about 14 miles outside Exeter, and I started looking into for example, the Romans, when the book is set actually about 200 years after the Romans actually finally abandoned Britain. And yeah, I know.
It seems so relevant right now somehow. It's like Europeans abandoned a story. Moving on.
Anyway, yeah. So, but they left some interesting things behind them, like, you know, that particularly, obviously we talk about Roman roads, but they also had things like, so in Isca, which is one of the old names of Exeter, which was a civitas. There's still there's plenty of Roman ruins that are still there, and they, you know, we've after excavating them, we found that they could, for example, heat their floors. So they had a form of central heating. It was like ridiculously expensive, and you had to have loads of slaves and to basically fan the flames constantly, don't make the fires go out. But it was really advanced, much more advanced than culture. You know, that sort of kind of civilization that we think of. Is completely different from what was going on in this country.
We often kind of jump as well, where we think it's like Romans, and then your brain just kind of jumps. Like when the Romans left before the kind of true Middle Ages kind of hit, this weird period of history of early Middle Ages where stuff still happened.
Yeah, stuff still happened, but it wasn't like Rome.
It wasn't like Rome, but we didn't yet have castles. It was like...
It was even, it was before the Castle Age, so it was before the Normans, and actually it was some kind of Norman brought in castle building particularly. We had hill forts, which of course is where Sistersong is set.
Although look up, because there's about five castles in the UK that are Roman castles. Mostly they're at ports, they're like port castles, and if you took a hill fort via a Roman villa and tacked on a few turrets, that's what
it could become a castle. Yeah.
And there's one in York that's just incredible, and I was sort of blown away by it because that kind of architecture to me didn't exist for another few centuries. Mm-hmm. But it's so weird that there is this sort of period of history that's just, it's a mess really of kind of influences, and like the Romans leave and we got some of their tech, but we sort of go a bit backwards because we don't really have the Romans anymore.
That's it. It's the tech bit that kind of interested me. So, I mean, I was going through one of my notebooks where I was, before I started, I actually made a few notes on various things. And one of the notes was about what the Romans left behind and the idea that it would be an alternate history. So not just historical fiction, it would be alternate historical fiction, so that, one of my ideas I had that it was almost steampunk, that the Romans were that advanced that they were actually almost like a steampunk civilization, and that the characters would unearth strange bronze wheels and things, timepieces, odd contraptions that they didn't understand because it was a different civilization. And when you were saying like ideas run away, and I was like, that is just too much. I don't think that that sort of world, that the amount of world building you'd have to do, actually doing alternate history is almost more challenging than doing secondary world fantasy and straight history. because you have to have enough of straight history and enough of secondary world fantasy to be able to do a convincing blend of the two.
Yeah.
And alternate history works because there is a grain of truth kind of in there. So you could see that the Romans were very advanced. They built aqueducts. They obviously had this underfloor heating. They invented many interesting kind of things that we would think of as quite modern now. But I think that trying to build a world where everything like this intersected and that my characters were digging up strange devices would detract so much from the core ballad, which is why I wanted to write Sistersong in the first place. That I just decided, look, the world is going to become a character in its own right. And while I love settings as characters, and I love that idea, this was not the story. This is not the right story to have the setting as a character and to have to pour all of this work into creating this alternate universe.
Do you think it takes away some of the, I mean, I don't want to say this because you've written fantasy, and I don't want to say that that's
no, please,
any less, but if this is a murder ballad that exists in our world, in our consciousness, does it, if you had put it in a fantasy world, would that have taken something away from the power of it? Because the wonderful thing about this murder ballad, and like some ballads that exist and folk ballads that exist, you can sort of see where they came from. There are historical events, there are things that triggered them. This one's origins are really mysterious, and it's sort of, was there an event? Did something happen? Like what happened that kind of led to this story it's one of those like myths that expand cultures. This crops up everywhere. There's so many different versions of it. Like, that kind of thing only usually happens if something's actually occurred. And there's power in kind of thinking that something occurred rather than switching it to a fantasy setting where you're like, this is a nice story, but it's not related to kind of us. There's a kind of power in keeping it in our world, I guess.
Yeah, I think that I completely agree, and I think that it probably did happen. I mean, there's stories of, certainly sibling rivalry, sibling jealousy. I'm fairly certain that sisters have killed each other, or brothers certainly, over men or women or trivial things that we would think are a bit ridiculous. But also that, the thing about folk ballads, very often they are dark, and they are, they're there to entertain, but they're very, very often they don't end well. The characters, they just have a shit time of it, and they don't. And there is, so that the grain of entertainment, the sensational factor, is very much plays a big part in this. And I think the sensational factor is clearly the bone heart moment, where clearly the older sister does not get away with her sibling's murder. And it's not just that her ghost comes back to tell the truth, it's that her ghost comes back in a really quite inventive and macabre manner. But what you say is really interesting, because this song, this ballad, has existed in not just the British Isles, but it crops up in Germany, it crops up in like Scandinavia, it's got in Scotland. I was gonna say, I feel bad about saying British Isles, because actually Scotland has its own very unique version.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to generalise there, but it's in Normandy. It's really quite a well-known story. So how much of the truth is in there, maybe there genuinely was family rivalry to the deaths of two young women, needless deaths. And it's very easy to take something like that and turn it into a remarkably outlandish murder ballad where one of the kids gets made into a harp, So, it would have been a shame to transpose all of that into a secondary world fantasy in a way.
Yeah, and I think we're not saying that there was a bone harp that sang out the tale of its own murder at some point, but if a sister murdered a sister and a travelling musician oversaw it and came to the father's hall and sang the song, in a very kind of Hamlet-esque way, that's definitely an event that could have occurred. And then, it gets filtered down and you add a supernatural spin on that, and you end up with something that's like, it's a bit like a Grimm's fairy tale, where it's an old tale that's been told, and possibly something, probably some girl did wander into the woods and get attacked by a wolf, but now we can turn it into a really dark, twisted moral tale that people will enjoy reading.
And that's exactly one of the kind of the driving ideas behind the whole novel, really, is the power of stories and the ability of stories to transcend the time in which they were written, or told orally. And this is the thing about folk ballads and folk stories in particular. They become timeless because they are such powerful stories and they have such powerful motifs that they can be retold in any setting and any time period. And they still have the power to move, to shock, and this is the danger and the beauty of the story, in that they, in a way, are more powerful than truth, because and this is the kind of idea that I wanted to explore in Sistersong, because the title of Sistersong is, it kind of sprung from the Trois. It's my kind of version of the Trois Sisters, Bonnie Swans. That Sistersong is the ballad. It is this ballad that does not tell the whole story, that casts these characters into stereotypes, and the danger inherent into stereotypes means it obscures the truth of their lives. And of course, Keen, who's the middle child, doesn't even appear in the ballad. His story is erased. That again, this idea of a third shadowy figure kind of between the two main women, intrigued me so much that that's why I wanted to tell Keen's story alongside the main female stories.
Yeah. Just going back to this three-dimensional harp, which is going so much slower than I was expecting. I think there's some sort of frame capture rate issue that means that's going very slowly. But
that's okay, because you said you didn't have enough content, so now we do.
Fine, soldering on. But yes, you can see me muddling through Mesh Mixer here. My CAD knowledge. I was taught Tinkercad, which is a free program, and I couldn't edit a mesh and a bought 3D object in the same way in Tinkercad. I needed something more powerful, and I needed a free piece of software that I could get to grips with quickly. Those who have watched my craft streams with Kim will know that I don't get on with Blender. I don't know why I don't get on with Blender, but I downloaded Blender, opened it in Blender, and went, nope! So I got Mesh Mixer, and you can see me attempting to work out how Mesh Mixer works, which is always fun. But this is just, deleting, and meshes are, because you're building 3D objects, they're the outside of an object, so they're hollow, and they're all made of planes. Everything is a flat plane, nothing is round in a proper kind of printing object. Sculptress is a bit different. That's one of my favourite 3D modelling softwares, which is a bit more like manipulating clay, but there's no curves, there's all just lots of flat planes. So trying to select like what looks like one piece of a bone to delete it involves selecting about 50 different planes.
Oh god, it sounds horrendously confusing. And the only thing I know from installing so many Skyrim mods.
Amazing. Yeah, very much like when it's slightly pixelates and people's heads go flat. It's just like this, it's planes. But yeah, how much historical, I mean, because you've said already that you work, this is your first kind of historical
foray into historical fiction.
Foray into historical fiction. How much research did you do? Because I know that your sister, who is also an author, who I used to share a house with, which is why I know her very well, likes to do an enormous amount of research and then kind of read nothing at all about the period. She kind of deep dives on it, gets all the stuff in her head, and then will avoid it until she's finished the novel. And it's sort of, I know some historical researchers like to write the novel first and then do the historical research so that it's kind of not infringing on the story. How did you go about that, kind of getting the historical accuracy and doing research or no research?
Well, not like my sister, for starters.
I did think it would be different, but that's another perspective just to put in there.
Well, this is very interesting because I tried to write this book in the same manner that I have written all my other books, which are secondary world fantasy, which is basically open up a Word document and start typing it. With a very, very sketchy plan in place. I am not a planner. But I quickly found that I could not do this with historical, because every time I I'd write a sentence. In fact, the opening chapter, you know, it has the Imbolc festival, which is one of the pagan festivals that welcomes. It's usually February the 1st. It welcomes spring.
It's like a spring equinox, isn't it?
It is. It's yeah, one of the ancient. You know, I suppose it heralds the good times.
It's the spring version of what we're at now, which is the winter solstice. So it's the spring thing of that.
It is indeed. But of course, if you don't know this, and you don't really know any of the traditions, and you don't really know what gods were particularly important at what times of year, then you run into problems almost immediately. And you know, like, what about the traditions? I mean, the opening of Sistersong, apart from Keen's kind of flashback memory, it's the main action starts with Keen is sitting on the steps of the Great Hall making a Brigid doll, which is Brigid was the goddess of spring, and they made these dolls as part of the Imbolc festivities. Goddess of fertility, of rebirth, also goddess of childbirth, of smithing.
Yes.
It's a mix.
Why not have an all-purpose goddess? Why specify? Jack of all trades goddesses.
Goddess of everything. Anyway, but I really did. So I tried to do this in the same way and I just couldn't do it. So I had to just stop. Couldn't just keep writing in this blank document because I kept coming up against my ignorance, which is not something I was used to doing. I usually, if I don't know something, I just make it up on the spot. That's my modus operandi, you know. That's what secondary world fantasy is really good about.
And then if there's any problems, you can go back and fix them later. You know, like...
Of course. If you change your mind and you think actually this piece of the magic doesn't actually make sense in the historical, social context of your world, then you can go back and redo it. Whereas this, I couldn't do that. So I realised quite early on that I would have to do at least a basic level of research. So I'd need to find out what the religion was, how widely it was worshipped and practiced. Of course, the complexity with that question is that incoming Christianity made things a whole lot more interesting and a lot more well, for a novel it was great because it adds a lot more tension to the story, but the problem with Christianity is that it was spreading at different speeds in different places. So to be honest, it really there's so few primary sources in the period. The only main one that's really good for this sort of you know, the Christianity part and the slight, you know, you can say the idea of how much pagan worship was still happening is Gildas, who I dutifully made a character in the book because I'm nice like that. Yeah, even though, sorry Gildas, you know, you're 1500 years dead. Apologies that I made you a character.
He is, you know, from after you mentioned him the other month, I sort of went and did a bit of research on Gildas also because which my patrons will get to hear about soon, and I'll be kind of announcing properly in the new year. I've got a project that I want to work on next year, which is sort of set around a similar time period, and so I went and looked at Gildas, and he's a bit biased.
Just a bit. He's a bit biased, basically against everyone apart from him.
So you sort of have to take everything he says with a pinch of salt.
Well, this is the problem with primary sources, opinionated primary. And he was extremely opinionated, so opinionated, in fact, that I actually wrote that into the book. And I wrote, he wrote a blazing condemnation of 5 British kings, which is half of his book is going on about how bad they are.
Everyone's rubbish.
Yeah, apart from me and the people who are Christian. And,
I mean, because what's really interesting, and I sort of found out the other day, I've just had to Google it again because I couldn't remember what it was actually called, is that you had Christianity and you kind of still had the old religion, kind of Celtic deities and things still happening, and both of these, but when the Romans had come in, they'd come in as with kind of historical Roman myths as we think of them, and then Christianity had spread from Rome during their occupation, and then they left, and so you've got like some Christianity, some Roman deities, some Celtic deities, and then you've got Pelagianism, which is the guy that just went, Christianity is a bit, I don't love Christianity, I'm going to sort of set up my own version of Christianity, and just went, we're not all evil and we don't sin, but we should pray to God, and you know, so just amongst this kind of mess of religions, you've got another guy going,
Well, the thing about Christianity, look at how many offshoots got now. There are so many variants of it, but no one can deny it's been an extremely popular import. It's probably the most successful export as well to certain parts of the world. Whether those parts of the world wanted Christianity as an export or not, it's there. And this is the same thing that happened in Britain, right the way through from the point that Christianity became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, obviously up until now, which is interesting because I wanted to make a pagan community. I wanted to make a community that still worshipped the pagan gods, and the pagan gods are much closer to the land. And I obviously, if you've read Sistersong, it's about the bond between people and the land. And I feel like paganism is a little bit closer. Christianity is very much, we look to heaven. It's not so pantheistic. We're not. It's not about revering the land and the land goddess and the bounty of the harvest, whereas paganism is very tied in with the seasons, the turning of the year. And so to write this book, to even start creating a setting for it, the religion aspect, I really had to get that straight. And I absolutely I put my hands up. I admit that there's quite a lot of stuff I've taken with pinches of salt, with poetic license, because there's just it's such a dearth of genuine fact around the period. And the other thing that makes it extremely complicated is the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which was not written until like 800. It's in the time of great King Alfred, and he commissioned this. It much later, like we're talking 400 years later than Sistersong, which is around 535. So the problem with that is that the Anglo-Saxons, he was obviously the King of Wessex, and Wessex is the group of Saxons that became England. And he was very keen to trace his heritage back to Cerdic and Cynric, who actually appear as characters in Sistersong. And whether that's true, whether they genuinely were related, it's very unlikely that they were, but this is what the Anglo-Saxons wanted to be remembered for posterity. And the problem with that is, of course, they had a political agenda. And when you have any sort of agenda, the facts get, trampled a bit.
Your writing has to be sort of ignored. Also, there's the classic case, and we all know the quote, history is written by the victors. If you're in charge, you are not going to say, well, I was an evil bastard and everyone else was lovely. You're going to write that you were great, and all the rebellions that you put down were wrong and you were correct. You're not going to say, actually, they had a really good point there.
Exactly. But this is difficult when it comes to writing a historical, because obviously because it's magical as well. There's quite a lot of fantasy in there. I felt that it wouldn't be too bad of me to twist a few things and be like, well, look, I cannot find out this information, so let's just use something that sounds as plausible as possible and go with that, which I think a lot of authors do.
You're not writing non-fiction. Like, that's the thing, you're not actually writing a historical reference book. You have to find ways to shoehorn your character. Like, if you've got a historical figure and you need your lead character to meet them, it doesn't matter that historical figure never met a character called that, because that's the narrative of your novel.
And hopefully it doesn't matter that your Anglo-Saxons that you call Wessex, the word Wessex wasn't actually invented in your time period. but it's cooler. So let's go with it.
I think there's also a part of, you do have to you have to write it in a way that a modern audience will understand, and a modern audience still has a vague understanding of Wessex, Essex, Sussex, these locations. So putting that in, even though it's not a word that exists yet, gives your audience a reference point.
Yeah, exactly. And Wessex is a contraction of West Saxons.
Yeah.
And obviously they did not call themselves that in 535 AD. That was they had their own tribal name, which I also use, but I just for punchiness, and also to reflect what where the history is going, because of course the thing about the Saxons, while they are technically the enemy, the invading armies, they did end up. We are their descendants. You know, they are England basically. So it's interesting in a way to write about a people that, because you know. The other thing that's very interesting is I did have to ask a few people who are much better at Old English than I am, because I know none at all, about how to I'm joking, translate a few things for me, because of course the main characters speak in a kind of precursor language to things like Breton, Gaelic, Welsh, called Brythonic. That's the language they spoke, and obviously it was not English, it was not Old English. Old English came in with the Saxons. So it's stuff like that as well, and being aware that they would not have they would have been speaking this particular language. And one of the things the copy editor went through with me is taking out words that are particularly Anglo-Norman. So there are words like liege lord, so my liege. Oh, it wasn't me.